Hey everyone, welcome to Quantum Mind Hub Stories. Please share your comments, perspectives, and lessons learned in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Now let's dive into the story titled, Her Husband Drove Her Away After She Lost Her Job. She returned years later with twins for revenge. A sparkling chandelier lit up the crowded hall as Amara, dressed in an elegant navy gown, walked beside her husband, Michael. They were at a glamorous work event hosted by her tech firm, and everyone seemed to adore Amara's brilliance. She'd been a rising star in the company, closing deals and impressing the board. Michael, standing tall in a tailored suit, basked in her limelight. The cameras flashed, capturing them smiling like the perfect couple. Amara noticed how often Michael stepped into the frame whenever he spotted a photographer. He'd grip her waist tightly, flashing his pearly white grin, making sure everyone could see he was connected to her success. "Babe, you're crushing it," he whispered, scanning the room to see who was watching. "Let's make sure we say hi to the board members. I heard they're finalizing budgets for next quarter, and I want them to know you're the best they've got." Amara nodded, but a small part of her felt uneasy. She sensed Michael cared more about boosting his own image than celebrating her achievements. Still, she swallowed that thought, reminding herself he'd been supportive of her career from day one, or so she believed. As they moved through the crowd, colleagues congratulated Amara on a massive deal she'd sealed earlier in the week. Michael would lean in and accept half the credit with phrases like, "Yeah, it's been a team effort," or, "I've been right there helping her strategize." In truth, Amara had done most of the work herself. Yet she let it slide, hoping that was just Michael's way of showing pride. A coworker named Dan approached, offering Amara a toast. "I don't know how you do it," he said. 3 product rollouts in a single quarter, all successful, and a personal track record that's untouched. You're unstoppable." She felt a wave of gratitude, but when she glanced at Michael, she saw a flicker in his eyes, something like ambition rather than genuine admiration. By the end of the night, everyone was abuzz with talk of Amara's potential promotion. Michael clung to her side, taking in the compliments like they were his own. As they left, Amara felt both proud and oddly uneasy, sensing cracks in the facade. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I'm overthinking. He loves me, he has to." But even as she tried to convince herself, a little voice in her head warned her not to ignore the signs. A week after that lavish event, Amara sat in her corner office, staring at a dreaded email. It was from HR, containing the subject line "Mass Layoffs." The company had been considering some restructuring, but no one expected it to happen so suddenly. A wave of panic washed over her. Everyone had assumed that her department was safe, especially given her recent achievements. But one by one, she watched her coworkers' faces crumble as they read the same email. Her phone buzzed. It was Michael, calling at the worst possible time. She answered on speaker, her voice trembling. "Hey, can I call you back?" He ignored her tone. "Amara, did you hear anything about layoffs? I hope we're not affected." "That'd be terrible," he said, sounding more worried about his own social standing than her state of mind. She closed her eyes, swallowing hard. "I just got the email," she admitted, voice shaky. "I'm on the list." For a moment there was silence. She hoped he'd offer words of comfort or maybe even some encouragement like, "Don't worry, we'll get through this together." Instead, Michael let out a heavy sigh. "That's not good," he said flatly. She couldn't believe how cold he sounded. It was almost like he was angry at her for getting laid off, not understanding her sense of shock and loss. Amara tried to keep it together, but tears welled up. She hung up the phone and gazed around her office, taking in the family photos on her desk, the motivational quotes she'd pinned to her walls, and the awards and certificates that once validated her efforts. Now it felt like all of it was crashing down. She packed a few personal things into a box, ignoring the pitying looks from colleagues passing by. As she left the building for the last time, she spotted her reflection in the glass doors, disheveled hair, teary eyes, and a heart weighed down by confusion. She wondered how she would break the news to Michael in person, hoping he'd wrap his arms around her and say, "I'm here for you." Instead, a deep-seated fear told her he'd be more concerned about how her job loss would affect his social image. As she clutched her box of belongings, Amara felt a hollow ache in her chest, thinking, "This can't be the end of everything I've worked for." Back at their condo that night, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Amara sat on the couch, hugging a pillow for comfort, as Michael paced across the living room. The city lights flickered outside, but neither of them paid attention to the skyline. "How could this happen to you, Amara?" Michael demanded, his voice laced with frustration. She looked up at him with watery eyes, feeling a swirl of guilt and sadness. "It was a mass layoff," she replied softly. "Not my fault. They cut a bunch of roles, and I happened to be one of them." He let out a bitter laugh. "You realize how this makes me look, right? My wife, once the star at a top tech firm, suddenly laid off? People are gonna ask questions." Amara felt a sting at his words. She wanted him to ask if she was okay, if she needed support, or if there was anything he could do to help her get through this blow. Instead, he focused on the way it affected his own image. She tried to keep her voice steady, but her heartbreak seeped through. "Michael, it's not about your reputation. I lost my job. I need you to be here for me." He shot her a sharp glance. "Yeah, well, you're not the one who has to explain this at the golf club next week. Everyone keeps congratulating me on having a high-achieving wife. Now I've got to tell them you're unemployed." Her tears started to flow, but he kept going. "You're a liability now," he said, his tone harsher than she'd ever heard. "You're supposed to be the brilliant breadwinner, and look at you just like that, gone from the company. It's embarrassing." Amara wanted to scream, to throw the pillow across the room. Instead, she stood up, shaky but resolute. "I'm not a liability, Michael. I lost a job, but not my abilities or my worth. You married me for better or worse, remember?" He shrugged, a sneer curling his lips. "Guess that vow only works when everything's going smoothly." His words felt like a punch to her gut. As she stumbled back, tears blurring her vision, a cold realization dawned on her. Maybe he valued her only when she was thriving, not when she needed true partnership. A few nights later, they attended a dinner with Michael's circle of friends, people who'd always admired Amara's professional success. The restaurant was upscale, complete with crystal glasses and candlelit tables. Amara tried to put on a brave face despite her inner turmoil. She hoped maybe Michael would tone down his frustration in front of others. As they settled in, the conversation turned to career updates. One friend boasted about a recent promotion, another mentioned a lucrative deal. Then someone turned to Amara. "You must be leading some new tech venture, right?" the friend asked eagerly. Amara glanced nervously at Michael, not sure how much he wanted her to reveal. Before she could respond, Michael waved a dismissive hand. "Actually, she's kind of in between jobs right now." His tone was almost mocking. A curious hush fell over the table. Trying to defuse the awkwardness, Amara explained softly the company did mass layoffs. It wasn't personal. Michael snickered. "Sure, that's what they all say. Truth is, if she'd performed better, they wouldn't have tossed her out." The entire table went silent. Amara's cheeks burned with shame. She tried to maintain composure, but a trembling anger built inside her. She noticed a couple of guests exchange uneasy glances, clearly seeing Michael's statement as harsh and uncalled for. Heart-thudding, she attempted to stand up for herself. "That's not exactly how it went, Michael. I consistently exceeded targets. The layoffs were business decisions, not performance-based." He shrugged, taking a sip of his wine. "Dead weight gets cut first," he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Tears pricked Amara's eyes, but she refused to cry in front of these people. She forced a tight smile and tried to focus on her plate, but her appetite was gone. The table's mood soured. People coughed or shifted uncomfortably, not sure how to respond to Michael's blatant put-down. In that moment, Amara realized something was deeply wrong in her marriage. A husband who truly loved her wouldn't publicly humiliate her, calling her dead weight in front of friends. As the meal dragged on, she barely spoke. Her heart was pounding with indignation, betrayal, and a fresh determination that she deserved more than being treated like an accessory who lost her shine. The next morning, Amara was still reeling from the dinner fiasco. She woke up early, hoping to reason with Michael before he left for the day. But as soon as she entered the living room, she saw him stuffing her clothes into a suitcase. Her throat went dry. "What's going on?" she asked, voice shaky. Michael didn't even look at her. "I've been thinking," he said, zipping the bag with a sharp yank. "I'm not cut out to babysit someone who can't hold on to a job. You need to go." Her heart pounded so loudly she thought her chest might burst. You're kicking me out because I lost my job?" He turned to face her, arms crossed, an icy glare in his eyes. "I've got my image to maintain, Amara. I'm an up-and-coming figure in my own circle, and I can't let your failure drag me down. This marriage was supposed to be a power couple scenario, remember? Now you're just nothing. Tears stung her eyes as she reached for his arm. Michael, we can fix this. I'll find something else soon. Promise. I just need a bit of time. He stepped back, refusing her touch, his face stone cold. Time is money, and you're costing me both. I'm done. Here. He shoved the handle of the suitcase into her hand. I've already got the divorce papers. They'll be finalized soon. I suggest you sign them without making a fuss. Amara's entire body shook. She looked around the condo that had once been their shared dream. Pictures of them on vacations, happy holiday cards on the fridge, and the couch where they used to cuddle on movie nights. All of it seemed to blur together under a haze of heartbreak. I thought you loved me, she whispered. He scoffed. Loved you? Maybe I loved what you brought to the table. But now that's gone. So do us both a favor and leave. In that instant, she felt her spirit crack. With trembling hands, she grabbed the suitcase. She left the condo with tears streaming down her cheeks, not sure where she'd go, but certain she never wanted to see Michael's face again. The door slammed shut behind her, echoing the finality of it all. Her marriage was over. Alone in a shabby motel room, Amara sat on the edge of the worn-out bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The steady hum of the air conditioner was the only sound keeping her company. She'd used what little savings she had to pay for a few nights, but after that, she wasn't sure where she'd end up. She pressed her palms against her cheeks, trying to stop herself from crying again, but the tears flowed anyway. Memories of Michael's harsh words replayed in her head like a broken record. Liability, nothing, dead weight. She felt worthless. The job she loved was gone, and so was her marriage. She thought about her family background. She'd worked her way through college, snagged that competitive tech role, and built a reputation as a high achiever. Now, everything she'd built seemed to have crumbled in a matter of weeks. She thought about calling old friends or mentors, but shame stopped her. She imagined their shocked reactions. How could the top performer end up laid off and then thrown out by her husband? She convinced herself they'd only pity her, and she wasn't ready for that. Despair weighed her down as she scrolled aimlessly through job listings on her phone. Most positions she saw were either too junior or required specialized skills she didn't have. Start from scratch, she murmured, tasting the bitterness in her mouth. She rubbed her aching temples, wishing she could rewind time and somehow prevent this disaster. Late into the night, she found herself sitting on the floor by the bed, hugging a threadbare pillow. She thought back to all the times Michael complimented her in front of others, but now realized those moments were always about how good she made him look. A cold realization sank in. He never really loved her for who she was. Eventually, the tears dried up, leaving behind an unsettling calm. She looked at the flickering streetlight outside the window and whispered, I'm at rock bottom. There's nowhere to go but up. Even though she felt utterly alone, a tiny spark of resolve began to glow within her. She might have lost everything, but she still had her mind, her skills, and a will to survive. If she was going to rebuild her life, she'd have to start from zero, and maybe that wasn't the worst thing if it meant never again being treated like a disposable object. A few days later, Amara was nursing a lukewarm coffee at a small cafe, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Suddenly, an old friend from the tech world, Rena, spotted her. Amara? I almost didn't recognize you. Rena exclaimed, genuine concern in her eyes. She sat down before Amara could protest. What's going on? You look like you need a friend. Amara hesitated, embarrassed to spill her troubles. But Rena's gentle expression broke down her defenses. In a quiet, trembling voice, she told Rena everything. From the layoff to the vicious words Michael hurled at her to the divorce papers she couldn't bring herself to sign yet. Rena listened without judgment, occasionally reaching out to squeeze Amara's hand. First off, Rena said when Amara finished, you're not a failure. Companies restructure all the time. It's not a reflection of your abilities. Amara nodded, still unconvinced. But what do I do now? She whispered. I feel like I'm stuck in quicksand. Rena's eyes sparkled with encouragement. I remember how brilliant you were, even back in college. You were always the first to solve coding challenges, always the one who found creative solutions in group projects. There's a new wave of opportunities out there, especially in consulting and e-commerce. People pay good money for your kind of expertise. Amara fiddled with her coffee cup. I guess. But starting a whole new business? That's risky, especially when I'm low on funds. Rena shook her head. You've got to bet on yourself again. I know you can do it and you won't be alone. I can connect you with a few folks who might be interested in your skill set. A small spark of hope flickered in Amara's chest. She felt lighter, like someone had tossed her a lifeline. They spent the next hour brainstorming ideas and possible contacts. Rena even offered her a couch to crash on for a couple of nights so she wouldn't burn through her motel money. By the time they parted ways, Amara's mindset had shifted. She realized she wasn't completely isolated. There were still people who believed in her, who saw her real worth beyond just a fancy title at a tech firm or the label of Michael's wife. She wasn't sure if she could pull off a new venture, but for the first time since she'd left the condo, she dared to believe she might be able to rebuild her life and maybe even surpass her old achievements. In a tiny rented studio apartment in a new city, Amara set up a makeshift desk. It was just a folding table and a cheap office chair, but it was hers. The air smelled like fresh paint and the faint scent of hope. She opened her laptop and started drafting a business plan. Her idea was to provide consulting services to small startups and entrepreneurs who couldn't afford big agencies. She'd been the top performer at her old job. After all, she knew how to close deals, manage projects, and streamline operations. Maybe she could do it on her own. The numbers on her spreadsheet looked daunting. She had enough savings to cover rent for a couple of months, maybe 3 if she was frugal. She planned her days meticulously. Mornings dedicated to market research, afternoons to sending emails and meeting prospective clients, and evenings to refining her pitch. She reminded herself of Michael's cruel words about her being dead weight. She wasn't going to let that stand. Every time she felt doubt creeping in, she'd recall his sneer and it fueled her resolve to succeed. Late one night, she was Skyping with Rena, who had offered more support. I've got a friend who's launching a new e-commerce platform, Rena said. They might need a consultant to organize their operations. Want to talk to them? Amara's eyes lit up. Yes, please, she replied. The conversation ended, leaving her feeling more optimistic. But the process wasn't easy. She got a handful of rejections in the first week alone. Some folks said she was too new, while others simply never responded after she sent her proposals. Still, she refused to let despair drag her down again. Each closed door just made her more determined to knock on another. She worked tirelessly, skipping meals and staying up late. If I can just land one decent contract, she told herself, I can build from there. Still fresh in her mind was Michael's dismissive laughter, which she turned into motivation. No one, especially not him, would ever look at her like a liability again. She was determined to prove she had value, first to herself and eventually to the world. Those first few months were brutal. Amara's laptop became her constant companion, and she shuffled between co-working spaces and tiny cafes to meet potential clients. Every penny counted. More than once, she skipped lunch to stretch her finances. She'd log onto job boards, post her services, and follow every lead she could find, even if it was small. Despite her best efforts, she faced roadblocks. Some startup founders doubted her because she was a solo consultant, without a big team. Others loved her ideas but didn't have the budget to hire her. She battled self-doubt daily, wondering if she should just take a regular job somewhere. But the memory of Michael's voice, calling her worthless, made her grit her teeth and push forward. She refused to let that narrative define her. Late at night, she often sat on her lumpy sofa bed, going over her finances. The numbers kept shrinking. One evening, as she stared at the bills, tears threatened to spill. Maybe I'm kidding myself, she said to the empty room. What if I fail? Then I'll just prove Michael right. The thought made her chest tighten. But in those darkest moments, she'd remember her old achievements. Her perseverance in college, the deals she once closed, the confidence she used to carry. She reminded herself those wins weren't flukes. They were products of her hard work and intelligence. She just needed to hang on until she caught a break. One day, She managed to schedule a pitch with a mid-level beauty brand looking to expand online. She prepped meticulously, studying their market, analyzing their customer demographics, and crafting a strategy. "This has got to work," she whispered, pacing her little studio, rehearsing her presentation. If she could snag this client, it might be the first real step toward stability. In these trying days, she also began to envision a future far beyond her immediate struggles. She pictured a time when she'd look back and laugh at how she once thought she'd lost everything. In that vision, she was strong, independent, and no longer haunted by Michael's betrayal. The hunger to see that future become reality pushed her to keep going, even when every fiber of her being felt drained and uncertain. The day of the important pitch arrived, and Amara's nerves buzzed like a live wire. She walked into a sleek conference room where the potential client's team waited. They nodded politely as she set up her laptop, projecting her slides onto a large screen. She cleared her throat and began, voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each sentence. Her presentation covered everything from SEO strategies to streamlined logistics. She spoke confidently about converting casual browsers into loyal customers, citing examples from her past successes. She emphasized how smaller brands could leverage influencer marketing without paying exorbitant fees. The more she talked, the more she remembered how good she was at solving problems. When she finished, there was a silence that felt endless. The team exchanged glances. Finally, the brand's founder, a woman named Carla, smiled and said, "I've seen a lot of pitches, but yours stands out. It's practical, it's clear, and it speaks to our specific needs. Let's discuss terms." Amara felt her heart soar. She maintained a professional demeanor, but inside she was screaming with joy. They talked numbers, timelines, and key deliverables. Carla insisted she sign an NDA, which Amara took as a great sign of trust. Before the meeting ended, they shook hands. She walked out of that conference room with a consulting contract, one that paid better than she'd dared to hope. Once she was safely in the elevator, she let out a tiny squeal, tears of relief brimming in her eyes. This was the breakthrough she'd prayed for. It wasn't $1 million deal, but it was enough to cover her bills and then some. More importantly, it was proof she could still succeed on her own merits. She texted Rena the good news, who immediately replied with a string of celebratory emojis. Amara clutched her phone, heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and vindication. No longer was she the desperate woman tossed out by her husband. She was a business owner, a consultant who'd just landed her first major client. Walking down the street afterward, she felt lighter than she had in months. The city around her seemed brighter, more alive. She glanced up at the skyscrapers and felt a surge of gratitude and determination. This was only the start, but it was a powerful beginning. She told herself she'd never let anyone take away her sense of worth again. With that first client under her belt, Amara's confidence soared. Word of mouth began to spread. Carla told her peers in the beauty and wellness sector about the stellar work Amara was doing. Soon, a few small boutique brands reached out, curious about her services. One referred to another, and in a blink, her once desolate inbox buzzed with inquiries. Amara upgraded from her creaky folding table to a decent second-hand desk. She even carved out a corner of her studio apartment as a dedicated office space. She marveled at how quickly her consultancy had taken off. Yes, it was still small-scale, but it was growing steadily. More importantly, she felt a piece of herself returning, the part that believed in her capabilities. Late one night, as she finalized a proposal, she reflected on her journey. She remembered the bitterness in Michael's voice when he called her dead weight. Now she was anything but. She was building something from scratch, proving to herself that her worth was never tied to one job or one marriage. She let that thought warm her heart. When she logged onto social media, she saw photos of Michael at high society events, still smiling for the cameras. She noticed he wasn't tagging her anymore. Obviously, they were estranged, but it didn't sting like it used to. Instead, she felt a curious indifference. She had her own life now, and it was humming along just fine without his validation. Her routines felt more balanced too. She got back into a morning jog, clearing her mind for the day's tasks. She set weekly goals, sign one new client, refine her pitch, streamline her billing processes. Each time she achieved one, she rewarded herself with small treats, like a fancy latte or a new book. There were still challenges. Cash flow was tight sometimes, and she had to be meticulous about expenses. But unlike before, she wasn't carrying a sense of defeat. She embraced each challenge like a puzzle to solve. And with every small victory, she felt her heart lighten. In quiet moments, Amara thought about her journey from the motel room to now, a budding entrepreneur who'd begun to heal emotionally. She wasn't fully over the betrayal, but she no longer felt defined by it. This newfound confidence was a whisper of something bigger on the horizon. She was determined to keep moving forward, no matter what. Somewhere in the middle of her blossoming career, Amara felt a tug in her heart she couldn't ignore. She wanted a family. Growing up, she'd always imagined herself balancing career success with motherhood, but she'd assumed it would be with Michael. Now that dream had shifted. She was single, forging her own path, and unsure if she'd ever trust someone enough to marry again. But the desire for children remained stronger than ever. She started looking into her options: adoption, surrogacy, or even having a child on her own. The more she researched, the more certain she became that she wanted to bring new life into this world. She confided in Rena one afternoon. "I know it's crazy, but I can't shake this feeling," she said, sipping tea at Rena's sunny kitchen table. Rena nodded supportively. "It's not crazy. You have so much love to give. Plus, you're building a stable foundation for yourself." Money was an issue, though. Adoption had its own hurdles, legal complexities, and waiting periods. Surrogacy was expensive. Yet as her consultancy grew, so did her savings. Slowly, she set aside funds specifically for her dream of becoming a mother. She imagined how sweet it would be to have little ones who'd see her as a hero, not because of her business success, but because of her love. While exploring clinics and discussing possibilities with professionals, she learned about the chance for twins. The idea made her heart flutter. She pictured two precious faces looking up at her, relying on her completely. She hadn't planned on going for twins initially, but once the opportunity presented itself, she couldn't deny how perfect it felt. It was like life was giving her a grand second chance, a real family that was entirely hers. She even considered naming them in honor of her late parents, who'd always supported her ambition. It felt fitting. A new beginning, honoring her roots while building her future. Sure, it was a huge step, and it wouldn't be easy juggling motherhood with a rapidly scaling business. But Amara believed in her resilience. She'd risen from rock bottom once. She could handle a few sleepless nights if it meant holding her own children in her arms. And so, with both excitement and trepidation, she set the wheels in motion. She met with lawyers, looked at financial requirements, and started the paperwork that would change her life forever. No part of her decision was driven by revenge at that point. She just wanted a life filled with love on her own terms. The months leading up to the twins' arrival were a whirlwind. Amara raced from client meetings to doctor appointments, from potential surrogacy consultations to vendor conferences. Sometimes she felt like she was juggling a dozen priorities, each just as critical as the other. Yet, she never felt more alive. Her business continued to grow, and she hired a small team of remote assistants to help manage day-to-day tasks. They'd handle scheduling, research, and first drafts of proposals while she focused on big-picture strategy. Balancing this business expansion with her personal life left her running on caffeine and sheer determination, but she found purpose in every step. Late at night, she'd settle on the sofa, rubbing her belly gently. Well, symbolically, because the pregnancy was carried by her surrogate. Still, in her heart, she already felt like a mother. She received regular updates about the twins' development, from hearing their little heartbeats over the phone to seeing ultrasound photos. Each update filled her with awe. There were moments of doubt, of course. During particularly stressful weeks, she'd wonder if she was taking on too much. "What if I can't be a good mom and run a company at the same time?" she asked Rena after a grueling day. Rena smiled. "You've got a track record of doing the impossible. This is just another chapter in that story." The closer it got to the twins' due date, the more introspective Amara became. She remembered what her mother used to say: strength isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up. She realized how far she'd come since the day Michael shoved her out the door. She wasn't just getting back up, she was soaring. As she organized her finances to handle potential medical costs and postpartum help, she felt gratitude for the clients who'd taken a chance on her. She recognized that her hustle, her heartbreak, and her grit had led her here, to a place where she could actually provide for two new lives. The surrogacy agency told her to be prepared for last-minute changes. Twins often arrive earlier than expected. Amara took that in stride. She was used to life throwing curveballs and she trusted herself to adapt. With each passing day, the reality of motherhood became more vivid. She'd read baby name books, browse nurseries online, and daydream about the moment she'd finally hold those tiny babies. The thought made all the sacrifices worth it. The call came at dawn. The twins were on their way. Amara threw on clothes in a flurry of nerves and excitement, then raced to the hospital. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum, and her thoughts were a jumble of hopes and fears. She dashed down the sterile corridors, found the right room, and met the medical staff who were overseeing the surrogacy process. It was surreal. She wasn't the one in the hospital bed, but the emotional intensity was all hers. She held the surrogate's hand, offering words of thanks and encouragement. When the cries of the first baby filled the air, Amara felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Then the second cry arrived right after, and her heart seemed to expand, too full to contain all the love rushing in. The nurses gently placed the babies in Amara's arms. Two perfect little bundles wrapped in soft blankets. She trembled with a mix of awe and relief. "Hello, my precious ones," she whispered, her voice catching. They were so small, yet each had a robust cry that told her they were full of life and possibilities. Her tears dripped onto their blankets, and she didn't care if anyone saw. In that moment, she forgot every harsh word Michael had ever spat at her. She forgot the betrayals, the humiliations, the nights she cried alone in a dingy motel room. All she felt was an overwhelming surge of love. This was her family, the one she created from her own determination and hope. Staff congratulated her, and someone snapped a photo of her cradling both babies, tears in her eyes. She looked at that photo later and realized she'd never seen herself glow like that. The twins were healthy, though slightly underweight, as twins often are. The doctors assured her they'd be just fine with a little extra care. Holding them close, she silently promised she'd give them the love and security she never got from her own marriage. She vowed they'd never have to question their worth. The name tags on their tiny wrists bore the names Amara had carefully chosen, each a tribute to her late parents. It felt like her entire past had come full circle, merging into this breathtaking new beginning. Time flowed quickly after the twins' birth. Amara took a step back from day-to-day business operations, delegating more responsibilities to her small but loyal team. She wanted to spend those first months bonding with her babies, feeding them, rocking them to sleep, marveling at their tiny fingers and toes. While she was knee-deep in diapers and late-night feedings, her company quietly thrived. Clients continued to sign on, impressed by the efficiency and creativity her team delivered. Amara stayed in touch through video calls, leading strategy sessions from home while the twins napped. She loved the contrast between discussing global e-commerce rollouts one minute and cooing at her infants the next. Though her life was busier than ever, she felt a calm sense of fulfillment. The weight of Michael's rejection no longer pressed on her heart. In fact, she rarely thought of him at all. When his name occasionally popped up in her mind, she found it easier to push aside any lingering anger or sadness. Her world was filled with sweet little giggles and business success. She had no room for bitterness. One afternoon, she took the twins for a walk in their double stroller around the neighborhood. No one recognized her as some big-deal consultant. She was just another mom out with her babies. That anonymity suited her fine. She enjoyed the simple pleasure of fresh air, the breeze rustling the leaves, and the gurgling sounds of her children. Neighbors would stop and gush, "Twins? How adorable!" She smiled, feeling more grateful than she ever had in her life. She'd gotten everything Michael insisted she'd never have, a fulfilling career and a beautiful family, except she achieved it all on her own terms. In moments of reflection, she'd recall how she once feared she'd be nothing without that corporate job or without her husband's approval. Now she realized she was far more than either of those things. She was a survivor, a dreamer, and a doer who turned heartbreak into an opportunity to rebuild. Those years passed in a warm blur of soft lullabies and quiet business victories. By the twins' second birthday, Amara had expanded her operations, and her finances were stable enough to secure a comfortable home for them. She deliberately avoided social media. She didn't need to show off. She was content in her peaceful, prosperous bubble, unaware of the storm brewing in Michael's life that would soon intersect with hers once more. While Amara's life blossomed into a quiet, fulfilling routine, Michael's world slipped into chaos. His flashy social life couldn't mask the cracks forming under the surface. His influencer girlfriend, sensing his finances faltering, left with a dramatic flourish, posting a social media rant about how he was no longer fun once the money dried up. Behind his confident facade, Michael panicked. The business venture he'd started with her, a luxury travel blog funded by sponsors, tanked when their relationships with brands soured. The bills stacked up fast, and Michael found himself ducking calls from creditors. After so many nights of partying and hogging the spotlight, he realized he had little to show for it. His old corporate contacts shrugged him off. Nobody wanted to hire someone whose reputation hinged on superficial achievements. Desperate for income, Michael crashed on a friend's couch in a cramped apartment that smelled of stale pizza and unwashed laundry. He stared at the peeling wallpaper one morning, remembering how he'd once mocked Amara for staying in a dingy motel. The irony made him cringe. He tried picking up freelance gigs or leveraging the few folks who still answered his calls. But each lead fizzled when they probed his background and found no real substance behind the hype. Sleep turned into a luxury he couldn't afford. He'd stay up, scrolling through job boards in the middle of the night, wishing he could rewind time to when he was admired for being part of Amara's success story. He hated admitting it, but he missed the stability her presence provided. One afternoon, in a fit of desperation, he sent out resumes to every company that had a "We're hiring" banner. He didn't care what the role was: manager, analyst, even an entry-level spot. He just needed a job, something to keep him afloat. He felt humiliated and hollow, realizing he'd once turned Amara away for being a so-called liability, yet here he was, persona non grata in the professional world. He tried to push aside the memory of how he'd humiliated her, but guilt gnawed at him whenever he thought about the moment he threw her out of their condo. He wished he could toss those memories aside like old newspaper, but regrets have a way of sticking around, whispering their accusations in the quiet hours of the night. A glimmer of hope arrived when Michael got a call from a company's HR department. He barely remembered applying to that position. His job hunt had been frantic, sending out resumes like confetti. The woman on the phone told him his qualifications caught their eye and invited him for an interview. Michael nearly dropped his cheap mobile phone in surprise. "Yes, absolutely," he said, trying to sound calm while his heart hammered. After ending the call, he did a quick online search of the company name, AX Consulting. He found a sleek website boasting impressive client testimonials. The site showed pictures of smiling employees, a modern office space, and references to major brands they'd helped. If this was legit, Michael thought, it could be the break he needed. He pictured himself working in a polished corporate setting again, wearing crisp suits, redeeming his tarnished name. As he skimmed the About Us page, he saw mention of a dynamic CEO who'd started the firm from the ground up. The name read AX, but there was no accompanying photo or full name on that quick section. The initials didn't ring a bell, and he was too busy daydreaming about climbing back up the social ladder to do a deep dive. He told his friend, the one he'd been crashing with, that he might have a lead. "Dude, maybe the tides are turning," the friend said, patting him on the back. Michael grinned weakly, still unsure if he deserved another chance but too desperate to question good fortune. That night, alone in the dim living room, he rehearsed how he'd present himself. He made a mental list of talking points, his old job's successes, downplaying that much of it was Amara's influence, his so-called leadership qualities, and his confidence in handling pressure. He ignored the sinking feeling that any halfway decent hiring manager might see through his flimsy track record. He needed to believe he could pull this off. In truth, Michael was more terrified than excited. He knew he'd burned a lot of bridges, but he clung to this one phone call like a lifeline, determined not to let it slip away, unaware of the shock waiting for him on the other side of that interview room door. Michael sat in his friend's cramped spare room, rehearsing his pitch. The walls were thin, and he could hear a TV blaring in the other room, but he tried to ignore the distractions. He jotted down every phrase that might impress the interviewers: strategic thinking, team player, results-driven mindset. Over and over, he practiced describing how he'd be an asset to AX Consulting, though he had no clue who'd be evaluating him. He ironed a wrinkled dress shirt he'd found at the bottom of his suitcase. The collar was fraying a bit, but it was the only semi-decent shirt he had left. He checked himself in the mirror, smoothing down his hair and forcing a smile. "Fake it till you make it," he mumbled. He realized how desperate that sounded, but desperation was all he had right now. Late into the night, he surfed the internet, looking for any clues about the person who'd be in charge of final interviews. He found mentions of the CEO's unique leadership style, and staff praising the personal touch of the founder, but not many details. The anonymity frustrated him, but he chalked it up to the firm wanting to keep the focus on the brand rather than the individual. Then a wave of anxiety hit him. He remembered humiliating Amara in that fancy restaurant, calling her dead weight in front of his friends. He recalled how he'd sneered when she begged for more time after losing her job. Shame washed over him, but he tried to push it aside. This interview had nothing to do with that part of his life, or so he believed. "Focus, man," he whispered, trying to shake off the guilt. Exhaustion finally won, and he drifted into a restless sleep filled with disjointed dreams. He dreamt about running through corporate hallways while coworkers pointed and laughed. He jolted awake, soaked in sweat, heart pounding. He forced himself to breathe. "It's just nerves," he told himself. "I'll nail the interview." Morning light eventually crept through the dirty blinds. Michael sat up, groggy but determined. He put on that fraying dress shirt, grabbed his resume, and said a quick goodbye to his friend. This was it. The interview process at AX Consulting began today, and Michael was prepared to give the performance of his life. Oblivious to the biggest surprise he'd ever face, Michael entered the sleek lobby of AX Consulting for the first round of interviews. The polished marble floors, modern furnishings, and cheerful receptionist instantly made him feel both impressed and uneasy. He worried his clothes might look shabby in contrast to the professional setting, so he tried to stand tall and exude confidence. "Mr. Bright, right?" the receptionist asked with a polite smile. He nodded, forcing a grin. She handed him a visitor's badge and directed him to a glass-walled conference room. As he passed by open-plan desks, he noticed employees tapping away on laptops or quietly conferring in hushed tones. Everything felt orderly and purposeful, the kind of environment he used to take for granted. He met with a mid-level HR rep named Sandra who asked the usual questions about his experience, work style, and career goals. Michael stuck to his script, emphasizing his ability to learn fast and adapt quickly. He wove in half-truths about his role in major projects at his previous company, carefully avoiding mention of his personal fiasco. Sandra took notes, nodding occasionally. At times, Michael felt a flicker of confidence. He was good at talking a big game. After about 30 minutes, Sandra concluded, "Thank you, Mr. Bright. We'll be in touch. But between you and me, I think our leadership team might be interested in hearing more." Her words lit a spark of hope inside him. He wanted to ask direct questions about the CEO, but he refrained, not wanting to seem pushy. Instead, he flashed a humble smile. "I appreciate the opportunity." Walking out, he felt an odd rush. He'd done well enough to move on. Maybe life was finally giving him a break. Part of him even dared to believe he could rise again, secure a decent position, get a nice apartment, and reclaim the status he'd lost. As he reached the elevator, he caught a glimpse of a wall display featuring images of successful client campaigns. It showcased smiling founders and staff, some photos featuring a tall woman with her face partially turned away from the camera. He paused, squinting. Something about the woman's silhouette seemed familiar, but a ding announced the elevator's arrival and a group of employees stepped out. Feeling self-conscious, Michael turned away, stepping inside quickly. He told himself he was just imagining things. He had no idea that he was glancing at the shadow of Amara's success story. Over the following week, Michael advanced through 2 more interview rounds, meeting different team leaders. Each discussion dug deeper into his technical skills and collaborative spirit. In truth, he floundered at some of the more detailed questions. A few times he fudged answers, hoping nobody would call him out. But the interviewers seemed impressed enough, or perhaps short-staffed enough, to keep him in consideration. He started noticing subtle traces of the CEO's influence around the office. Posters displayed motivational quotes signed with an elegant AX. Photos in the hallways featured staff at team-building events, with a figure in the background who always seemed to be the center of attention. Michael couldn't quite make out the face in the pictures, but something tugged at his memory. Still, he was too focused on securing the job to connect the dots. He had a brief exchange with an admin who mentioned, "The boss is tough but fair, she's built this place from the ground up." The admin spoke about how they all respected the CEO's journey from a small apartment to a multi-million-dollar consultancy in just a few years. That stung Michael a bit because it reminded him of how Amara had similar grit. But that's just a coincidence, he muttered under his breath, feeling a sudden pinch of guilt. Tension grew as he waited for the final interview invite. Late one evening, he checked his email compulsively, refreshing his inbox every few minutes. His friend teased him, saying he looked like a nervous teenager waiting for a crush's text. Michael didn't laugh. His entire future seemed to hinge on that one email. When the message finally arrived, it was from AX Consulting's HR. "Congratulations. You've been shortlisted for the final round of interviews." Michael felt a flood of relief. He texted the friend whose couch he'd been hogging, "I might actually get this job. Things are looking up." The friend responded with a thumbs-up emoji and a simple, "Great job, man. Keep going." Michael's pulse raced at the thought of turning his life around. He considered how quickly he'd adapt if he got hired, fantasizing about a stable paycheck, maybe renting a decent apartment. He pictured taking clients out for dinners, regaining that sense of importance he craved. He had no clue that the final interview would be the most terrifying and eye-opening moment he'd ever face. Michael woke up early on the day of the final interview, anxious butterflies fluttering in his stomach. He rummaged through his meager wardrobe, choosing the best combination he could muster, a blazer that was a little tight but passable and the same shirt he'd worn before, carefully pressed again. He arrived at the AX Consulting building with time to spare, deciding to wait in the polished lobby. Employees bustled around, greeting each other with friendly nods. A sense of camaraderie pervaded the space, stirring Michael's envy. He missed being part of a thriving team, feeling purposeful every day. 15 minutes before his scheduled slot, an HR assistant approached. "Mr. Bright," she asked softly, scanning a list on her tablet. "The CEO has asked for a one-on-one meeting with you. Please follow me." Michael's pulse quickened. He tried not to show how nervous he was. He rode a private elevator to the top floor, stepping into a quieter corridor lined with modern art. The assistant led him to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see someone inside, standing by a large desk. "Right this way," the assistant whispered, then left. Michael inhaled deeply, forced a confident stride, and knocked on the door. "Come in," a familiar voice said. He froze. He couldn't place why it sounded familiar at first, but a chill crept up his spine. He stepped inside, and there, seated behind an expansive desk stacked with files and a laptop, was Amara. His Amara, except she was clearly not his anymore. She looked poised, her hair swept back in a neat twist, dressed in a fitted blazer that radiated authority. For a second, neither of them spoke. Michael's eyes widened in shock, his heartbeat hammered in his ears. Meanwhile, Amara regarded him with a calm expression, but her eyes flickered with recognizable emotion, hurt, pride, maybe even pity. Michael swallowed hard, his legs threatening to give way. He realized in one staggering moment that AX Consulting was Amara X's empire. The final interview was with his ex-wife, the woman he'd coldly driven away. And now she was the key to his future. In the stillness of that grand corner office, Amara locked eyes with Michael. His face had paled to a ghostly white, and for a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Standing up slowly, she gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit," she said, voice measured. Michael fumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet as he lowered himself into the seat. His mind scrambled for words. "Amara, I had no idea." His voice broke, reflecting the shock that rattled him. He'd never imagined she could climb to these heights, let alone be the CEO interviewing him. Amara leaned forward, folding her hands. "It's been a while," she said gently, though her tone carried an underlying edge. "Let's skip pleasantries. You applied for a position at my firm. Your skills seemed adequate enough for HR to consider you. Now we're here." Michael swallowed, his throat parched. He tried to steady himself. "I'm so sorry for how things ended," he stammered. "I didn't know, I never thought." She held up a hand, stopping him. "We'll get to that. But this is a professional setting, and we should address the job first." She opened a sleek folder containing his resume, scanning it briefly. "You have experience that could be valuable for our expanding sales department." However, she set the folder down. "I also know the kind of man you used to be. A man who threw me out when I needed support the most." The impact of her words felt like a punch to Michael's gut. He fought back the urge to beg for forgiveness right then and there. But he also realized he was in an interview, so he tried to stay composed. "I've changed," he whispered, voice unsteady. "I'm not proud of what I did." Amara's eyes glinted with a mix of pain and resolve. "I'm sure you're not," she murmured. "But we're not here to discuss your pride. We're here to see if you're a fit for AX Consulting." So let's talk about your skill set, shall we? Michael nodded, feeling the humiliation rise in his chest. He answered her questions about his background, about how he handled sales funnels and client relations. The entire time he could sense her analyzing him, not just his words but every bit of remorse flickering in his eyes. When the interview wrapped, he braced himself. He half expected her to dismiss him on the spot, maybe even throw his own hateful words back at him. Instead, she closed the folder and said, "I'll have HR contact you with next steps." With that, she stood, indicating the meeting was over. Michael rose, heart pounding. He wanted to say 1,000 things but couldn't form a single coherent sentence. Amara turned back to her computer, dismissing him silently. He walked out, knees weak, understanding he'd just faced the biggest role reversal of his entire life. Later that afternoon, Amara asked HR to set up a second, more informal meeting with Michael. She told them she needed to discuss final details, but in truth, she knew it was time for a more personal confrontation behind closed doors. When Michael entered the room, he looked both anxious and relieved. He probably thought he was about to learn if he got the position. Amara waited until the HR coordinator left, then locked eyes with him. "Let's speak openly," she said. "No corporate formalities." Her tone was steady, but a swirl of old emotions churned inside her: anger, betrayal, and a tinge of pity she tried to push away. Michael swallowed hard. "Amara, I regret everything I did. I was stupid, shallow," and she cut him off. "That's an understatement," she said, her voice thick with suppressed hurt. "You left me when I was at my lowest, humiliated me in front of your friends, and threw me onto the street as if I were trash." Her cheeks flushed at the memory, and she paused to catch her breath. "And now, here you are, needing my help." His eyes dropped to the floor. "I deserve your anger," he admitted. "But I'm begging you to believe me when I say I'm sorry. Life has knocked me down hard, and I've realized how terrible I was." Amara studied him for a moment. She remembered the nights she cried in that motel, the shame she felt walking away from what used to be home. Part of her wanted to unleash everything she'd bottled up. But she'd grown. She no longer felt the need to scream at him. Her success and happiness spoke louder than any angry rant. "Apology accepted," she said softly, surprising even herself. "But that doesn't erase what happened. You'll have to live with it." She took a slow breath. "The reason I asked for this meeting is to clarify a few things. If you work here, you'll be reporting to managers who report to me. You'll start at an entry-level role. No special treatment, and no illusions that we'll ever be us again." Michael blinked back tears of shame and relief. "I understand," he whispered. "I'll do my best, and I won't cause trouble." He sounded defeated, like someone who finally grasped the full scope of his past cruelty. Amara tapped her pen on the table. "I'm giving you this chance not because I owe you anything, but because I believe in second chances. For your sake, don't waste it." With that, she signaled the conversation was over. And as Michael left the room, she realized she felt lighter, as if part of the burden from her past had lifted. When HR notified Michael that he'd be offered a junior assistant role within the sales department, he felt a complex swirl of relief and humiliation. Junior assistant? This was the same man who used to brag about his wife's status at upscale dinners, wearing suits that cost more than what he'd now earn in a month. Still, it was better than being unemployed and broke. He'd do anything to rebuild his dignity. Word spread quickly among the management team that Michael was someone from the CEO's past. Some employees whispered speculations, but no one dared ask Amara directly. She'd made it clear that professional boundaries were to be respected. Michael walked into his new department, head bowed, trying to dodge curious gazes. His new boss, a no-nonsense woman named Trina, handed him a stack of files on his first day. "You'll be helping with data entry, scheduling, and basic client follow-ups. Any questions?" He shook his head, swallowing his pride. A small part of him wanted to flee, but he reminded himself that this was his chance to start over. The day dragged on as Michael sorted spreadsheets, updated databases, and ran errands for coworkers. He'd occasionally glance through the glass walls to see if he could spot Amara, but she was nowhere in sight. He was both disappointed and relieved. He wanted to prove he could do his job well, but also dreaded the awkwardness of running into her in front of others. After work, he trudged back to his friend's place, exhausted in a different way. A humiliating sense of gratitude filled him, gratitude for the small paycheck, the chance to have four walls of an office around him again, and the knowledge that maybe, just maybe, he could piece his life together. But the new position was also a bitter pill to swallow. There were times he wanted to snap at his team for giving him menial tasks or lash out at the quiet smirks when they realized he had no special privileges despite knowing the CEO. Yet he bit his tongue, remembering he'd once been the one to demean Amara. In that sense, it felt like karma was whispering, now you know how it feels. Amara observed Michael's first week from afar. She instructed HR to give her daily updates, not to micromanage, but to ensure her staff remained comfortable with this unusual hire. To her surprise, the reports indicated Michael was showing up on time, doing his tasks without complaint, and even putting in extra hours. It was a far cry from the arrogant man she once knew. One evening, after most employees had gone home, Amara lingered in her office, looking through old pictures on her phone. There they were, snapshots of her and Michael on their wedding day, beaming with joy. A pang of heartache came, but it wasn't as sharp as before. She realized how much time had passed, how much she'd grown, and how much she'd overcome. Sighing, she opened a file on her laptop labeled Legal Docs. The divorce papers that, in her haste to rebuild her life, she'd filed without ceremony. They'd been finalized long ago, yet she rarely looked at them. Now she glanced at the date, recalling how lost she felt that morning in the motel. A wave of gratitude filled her instead of pain. She had found her strength. She had started a consulting empire. She had twins who adored her. Closing the folder, she leaned back in her plush chair. A part of her considered calling Michael into her office and laying out every harsh thing she still wanted to say. But she rejected the thought. She didn't need to humiliate him. Her life, her success, and the love she shared with her children were enough proof that she had risen above the rubble he'd left her in. It was a silent victory, no grand gestures of revenge, no scathing remarks. She realized that in giving him a job at her firm she had the ultimate power to show mercy or cruelty. She chose mercy if only to remind herself that she was stronger, kinder, and more dignified than Michael had ever given her credit for. She glanced at the clock, remembering she had to pick up the twins from her friend's place. Smiling, she gathered her things and left her office, feeling a calm sense of closure. She didn't need to prove anything to Michael. She'd already proven it to herself. Michael's official first day brought him face to face with the humbling reality of his new role. Trina walked him around the department, introducing him to coworkers who stared a little too long, likely curious about the rumor that he had history with the CEO. People politely shook his hand but kept their distance, as if they sensed some unspoken tension. Throughout the day, he carried files, refilled coffee supplies, and handled tedious data tasks. At one point, he was hunched over a row of sticky notes, trying to sort them by priority for Trina. His back ached, and he longed for a break. But he pushed through, determined to show he wasn't a slacker. Around midday, he spotted Amara walking through the office with a couple of department leads. They seemed deep in conversation about a new client acquisition. She wore a confident smile, her posture relaxed yet commanding. Michael felt a twist in his gut, half admiration, half regret. He remembered when that brilliance was something he flaunted to boost his own image. Now he watched it from the sidelines, acutely aware he was just another employee in her empire. He tried to duck out of sight, not wanting to distract her or draw attention to himself. But as she passed by, she glanced his way. Their eyes met and she gave him a slight nod, neither friendly nor hostile, just a professional acknowledgement. That tiny moment felt like a tidal wave of emotion for him. By 5 o'clock, most employees started packing up. Michael stayed late, tidying his workspace to leave a good impression. As he was about to shut down his computer, Trina tapped him on the shoulder. "Long day, huh?" she asked. He nodded. She offered a small smile. "Not gonna lie, some folks think it's awkward having the CEO's ex here. But if you keep your head down and do your job, I'll support you." "Fair enough." Michael mustered a grateful smile. "I appreciate it. I won't let you down." He wasn't used to this kind of humility, but he knew he had no choice. Walking out of the building that evening, he felt equal parts relief and apprehension. He had a paycheck coming, but the path to redemption or even basic acceptance seemed miles away. Yet, despite the humiliation, he felt a faint spark of motivation. Maybe this was the start of something better, if he could live with the tension and keep pushing forward. A few weeks later, Amara decided to bring her twins to the office for a quick visit. One of her managers was celebrating a work anniversary and they'd planned a casual get-together with snacks and a small cake in the break room. Amara figured it was as good a time as any for her kids to see where mommy worked. Michael, diligently filing documents in an adjacent corridor, heard the excited chatter before he saw them. He peered around a corner and spotted Amara walking in, each hand clasped by a small child, a little boy and a little girl, both with bright, curious eyes. Colleagues gathered around, cooing at the adorable twins. The children squealed with delight when offered cookies. Michael's heart lurched. He'd never considered Amara might have become a mother. And now, seeing her with not just one but two children, he realized how much time had passed and how life had moved on without him. He felt glued to the spot, unable to tear his gaze away from the scene. The kids each looked like they carried a piece of Amara's spirit, their innocent smiles reflecting her determined warmth. He recalled a fleeting conversation they'd once had about starting a family, how she wanted kids one day, and he'd vaguely agreed as long as it didn't interfere with their big social life. Now she was living that dream alone, radiating a contentment he'd never witnessed during their marriage. Just as he was about to slip back and pretend he hadn't seen them, the little boy caught sight of him. The child stared curiously, then tugged on Amara's sleeve. She glanced in Michael's direction. He froze, feeling like an intruder in her happiness. But she didn't shoo him away, she simply offered a small nod of acknowledgement, not inviting nor dismissing him. He swallowed the lump in his throat, turned, and left quietly. Back at his desk, he struggled to focus, haunted by the sight of what might have been if he'd chosen love over ego. The twins were living proof of Amara's new life, one filled with real joy and purpose, whereas he'd spent years chasing empty validation. For the rest of that day, a hollow ache settled in Michael's chest. He finally understood the real cost of his past cruelty. Some things, he realized, were beyond repair. A couple of days later, Amara caught Michael alone in the hallway. She could see the hurt in his eyes whenever he glanced at the twins. Sensing it might be best to clear the air, she asked him to step into a nearby conference room. It was empty at that hour, the lights dimmed except for a single row illuminating the center table. They stood facing each other, the silence thick with unspoken emotions. Amara let out a small sigh, folding her arms. "I noticed you saw the twins the other day." Michael nodded, his gaze downcast. I didn't want to intrude," he mumbled. "They look wonderful. You must be so proud." Amara's lips curved into a gentle smile. "I am," she said. "They're my world." She studied Michael for a moment, taking in the slump of his shoulders. This man who once boasted so loudly now seemed subdued, almost broken. "I want you to know," she began, her voice calm, "that I'm not doing any of this, hiring you, letting you see my new life, to rub my success in your face." She exhaled softly, as if shedding a lingering burden. "I've moved past that kind of thinking. My life doesn't revolve around hurting you back. I have my children, my business, and my own peace of mind." Michael nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand," he whispered. "I'm grateful you gave me a job when you owed me nothing but contempt." He wiped at his eyes, embarrassed by his show of emotion. "It's hard seeing what I lost, but I have no right to complain." Amara stepped closer, her expression compassionate but firm. "I wanted this conversation to give you closure. Not to taunt you, but to let you know you're free to move on. You don't have to tiptoe around me or the twins. If you ever see us in the office, it's okay to say hello. But remember, we're not your family. They're my children, and this is my life." He sniffled, nodding. "I know," he said, voice quivering. "And I'm sorry for everything. I just hope, maybe one day, I can be worthy of forgiveness." She offered a nod of understanding. "You already have my forgiveness, Michael," she said. "But you'll have to forgive yourself, too. That's a longer journey." With that, she stepped aside, letting him pass. He left the conference room, feeling both lighter and more sorrowful than ever. In her clear, unwavering voice, he heard the finality. Her life had gone on, and there was no place left for him in it. That night, Michael lay on the lumpy sofa bed in his friend's living room, staring at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. The weight of Amara's words pressed heavily on his mind. She'd forgiven him, but it wasn't a ticket back into her heart or her life. It was simply her way of cutting the last thread of resentment that tied them together. He flicked through his phone, scrolling social media with disinterest. Every polished photo or success story only reminded him of how far he'd fallen. He paused on a picture posted by an old acquaintance, a glamorous dinner event that Michael used to be invited to back in the day. Now he was on the outside looking in, just another commenter in the digital crowd. In a moment of self-reflection, he set the phone aside. He couldn't keep drowning in regrets or illusions. It was time to accept the harsh truth. He destroyed something real and beautiful because he was too consumed by status and appearances. Tears burned the corners of his eyes as he thought about the twins' 2 lives that symbolized everything he'd forfeited. He also reflected on his own patterns of behavior. He remembered humiliating Amara at that dinner, forcing her out of their home, ignoring her cries. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. If he wanted real change, he had to let go of the superficial, self-centered mindset that once defined him. Life had to be more than name-dropping and fancy suits. Michael decided then and there to do what little he could to become a better person. Maybe that meant throwing himself into this junior assistant role, learning from the ground up, and proving he could be reliable. Maybe it meant apologizing not just to Amara but to the friends he'd mistreated, to the family members he'd ignored when things were good. In the silence of that cramped living room, he felt something shift inside him. It was an honest acceptance that the old Michael, the one who valued image over love, had to die for him to truly live. He whispered to the darkness, "I'm sorry," and felt a tiny spark of hope flicker amidst his sorrow. If he worked hard enough, maybe he could build a life that was humble but honest, a life where he didn't take others for granted. Months slipped by, and the dusty winter air gave way to fresh spring breezes. Michael remained a junior assistant at AX Consulting, quietly learning the ropes. He took on extra tasks, showed up early, stayed late, and gradually earned a few nods of respect from coworkers who noticed his diligence. He didn't try to buddy up to Amara. He kept their interactions purely professional. Over time, the gossip quieted as everyone got used to his presence. At an office gathering one afternoon, employees gathered in a small lounge area to celebrate the signing of a big client. Amara entered, twins in tow, though they were a bit older now and even more curious about the bustling environment. The room buzzed with excited chatter, and Michael stood on the sidelines, sipping a cup of coffee. He watched Amara laugh with her team, the twins clinging to her legs and giggling. She radiated a warmth that lit up the entire room. For a fleeting moment, she glanced his way. He offered a polite nod, and she returned it with a slight smile, an acknowledgement of his presence but nothing more. In that exchange, Michael felt closure. He understood the boundaries and accepted them. He carried no illusions of winning her back or becoming a father figure to the twins. He was just an employee in her company, humbled and striving to rebuild his life. As the crowd dispersed, he picked up some empty cups to help clean up. A coworker clapped him on the back. "Hey, good job with the spreadsheets last week," they said. "You saved us a ton of time." Michael smiled, appreciating the small praise. It wasn't the grand admiration he once chased, but it felt more genuine. Meanwhile, Amara ushered her children down the hall, promising them a quick look at Mommy's desk before they headed out. She never looked back at Michael, but she didn't need to. She had found her happy ending, a thriving business, a loving family, and self-respect. Michael, on the other hand, had learned a painfully valuable lesson about kindness, humility, and the cost of betrayal. And so life continued. Amara lived in her well-earned joy while Michael worked quietly, still trying to piece together what remained of his old dreams. They coexisted under one corporate roof, each respecting the silent distance between them. No second romance, no melodramatic reunion, just the bittersweet truth that some mistakes can't be undone, but they can pave the way for profound growth. After the story, thanks so much for reading. We'd love to hear your comments, perspectives, and any lessons learned in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends if the story resonated with you. Your support means a lot, and we can't wait to read what you have to say.